Accommodation is a huge issue for people coming to the island, and the campground is really used a lot in the summer.
We're happy to see education as a priority, absolutely. And now we'll be looking at the details to see if our priorities are in there within that education budget somewhere.
As you know, climate change is really, really expensive. So adapting and mitigating that, often falls to municipalities to do that.
Welcome to This Week Uncut, where we take a look at the top stories of the week from CHCO-TV and the Courier. I'm Vicki Hogarth.
And I'm Nathalie Sturgeon. We begin this week with the provincial budget and some decisions that are hitting quite close to home.
Obviously, there's a lot of speculation before the budget is revealed, but we are talking about some cuts that, with the tourism season approaching, might be significant and impactful to our region.
That's right. So we sort of got a greater picture of what that's going to look like. And there have been months of speculation about these difficult decisions that the government was going to have to make, given that the last deficit was reported to be 1.33 billion. We now expect that number to increase to 1.39 billion, and we have 15.6 billion in new spending. But we did see cuts, and we're going to sort of walk ourselves through that today, which includes the closure of 6 tourism and heritage sites this year. And then there are 4 more that are not going to close, but they'll remain open this year, but we'll begin a transition to different ownership or private ownership.
Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty, especially when it comes to Southwest New Brunswick and what exactly this means, what we should prepare for, especially as many businesses are about to launch their busy season.
Right, so there was 3 specific heritage and tourism sites that are unique to Charlotte County that were on that list. Sheriff Andrews House will close this year. Anchorage Provincial Park and Campground on Grand Manan will see a transition of some sort in a year, and Oak Bay Provincial Park and Campground will also see some sort of transition in the next year.
Okay, so when we talk about transition, what exactly does that mean? We have Sheriff Andrews House. Most people in Southwest New Brunswick, especially in St. Andrews, will know it's a staple on King Street, right near Water Street too. Even our own Lucas Kohler worked there when he was a teenager, wearing that historical garb and greeting tourists, having tea with tourists. But what was the formula for deciding where these cuts would happen? Obviously, they must have data that supports why they chose these locations to be the first cuts.
So the decision was based on the metric that they receive fewer than 5,000 visitors per year. And you would have known that back in the summer, the Courier covered the issues with Minister's Island about not receiving enough funding, but, potentially receiving more visitors and other heritage and tourism sites. So they sort of had to take a look at the ones that aren't performing well and performing well enough to sort of back up their funding allocation, and that they've landed on these 10 locations, but much to the surprise of the locations in which they exist. I mean, I reached out to the town of St. Andrews, who's obviously not had a time to talk about this, but they did say to me that they were not notified of that decision ahead of time, that this partnership has existed for years, and they were surprised by the decision that the province made. And they're gonna bring it back to council, and they're gonna have a discussion. But in terms of how they move forward, that's really unclear. Like, the Anchorage Provincial Park and Campground is operated by the Boys and Girls Club on Grand Manan. So how do they fit into that situation? Can they afford to take it over? How can the village help them? And you're going to hear from Bonnie, the mayor, in just a few minutes. But it's sort of like, but they have a year to figure it out. Okay. Oak Bay Campground is, I believe, under a lease. So I think Joe Moffat is the leaseholder there, and he's come to council to talk about the tourism accommodation levy that they're considering in St. Stephen. So there is options available, but it's just a matter of how these organizations decide to move forward they have a year to figure it out. Sheriff Andrews' house is out of time.
So what does that mean for them, though? Does that mean people from the community could come forward, maybe start a committee and figure out how we could do it on our own? I know in Southwest New Brunswick, oftentimes that is the case anyway. It's a group of volunteers, people that care about their community that step in and try to make it work. So what will that mean for the future of it this summer even?
That's not really clear to me. I think you might get a better picture when councils get together again and meet again to discuss these decisions, right? These decisions just happened on Tuesday. They're very fresh. A lot of councils either haven't met or are planning to meet, and they really only have a few meetings left. I think even Eastern Charlotte just has the one meeting left before the election. So maybe some of these decisions happen after that election, but certainly it's just going to be up to them to sort of have this discussion. But part of the rationale also is that when the finance and treasury board spoke to tourism, heritage, and culture, they said the funding that they were being given was being spread out very thin. So operationally, they were talking about, some of these places really need heavy capital investment, and we just can't do it because we're spreading them out to different places. And so when you're getting requests for more funding for a site that is not receiving any more than 15 or 2,000 people a year, it doesn't, according to the minister, it doesn't justify the cost.
Okay, and I'm thinking back to some of the coverage we did this year when Minister's Island in late 2025 was worried about being on the chopping block for provincial cuts. That doesn't seem to be the case, though.
Right. Well, not yet. And there was a large discussion about, handing the keys back over to the province and saying, listen, we can't do it with the money that you're giving us. And I don't know where that conversation stands. But what I do understand from the minister is that the money that is going to be sort of taken back from these sites that they're deciding to close or transition to private ownership or other ownership will be redirected toward more successful sites that need that investment. So the story is not over. I will say that, as you've mentioned, each of these locations have a special connection to the place that they are. And I spoke to Mayor Morris about this particular campground on the island, something that is very special. And according to her, accommodation is extremely hard to find on the island when tourists do make their way over. And she said, losing that would be a huge loss to the businesses that do exist there. So it's sort of a challenging situation. I said to the minister, how are you going to justify this decision to tourism-based economies that rely on these things? And he said, yeah, that's a great argument, but we don't have the justification when you don't have the numbers to support it.
Well, here's my example right now. I was able to book my puffin tour. Finally, Graham and Ann, finally. I was on at 10 a.m. the day it would open. And my mom and I are she doesn't know yet, it's Mother's Day. But that was exactly the point brought up to me as soon as I successfully got my booking. Where are you going to stay now? Because there are weekends. Islanders know where maybe it's a big puffin weekend. There are certain times of year the bird watchers especially know exactly when to be somewhere, and you can't get a room. And a campground, for a lot of people, is either the best option or the next best option, and they can accommodate more. So I think that Islanders know that. Islanders know that the spillover of not having enough rooms, a campground is a great place to make do. And it's some people's preferred place too. So we know it in Charlotte County at the ground level, exactly what it could mean. But it'll be interesting to see what happens this summer. Any other takeaways from talking with Mayor Morris?
I mean, they have a year, which is what she said, to sort of figure this out. They've reached out to the Boys and Girls Club as well as the Minister of Tourism, Heritage, and Culture. And so the next steps are really kind of in their court. They have the time. Others don't have the time. So it's going to be a tricky future. Take a listen to Graham and Ann Mayor Bonnie Morris.
Oh, I was really surprised, obviously, yesterday, not realizing that the Anchorage was potentially on a list to be looked at. About 13 years ago, the Anchorage went from being a provincially operated provincial park to it's now operated by BGC Graham and Ann. And the village was very involved in sort of the initial part of that process because we wanted to ensure that the anchorage stayed open for the community and for visitors to the island. And so to see, 13 years later, we're having this conversation again. It's a lot of the same issues we talked about back then are still at the forefront for us, going forward into this summer. So there's a couple of things for the island that this means. The campground, I'll start there. Certainly, when you look in the summer with the tourism industry, accommodation is a huge issue for people coming to the island, and the campground is really used a lot in the summer. Even some islanders will go there and spend like a week or a few weeks, away, they're home away from home, that sort of thing. But for visitors to the island, Grand Banana is one of those places where you can't stay. It's hard to stay somewhere else and visit. You can do a day trip, but most people who want to be here, they want to be here, spend the night, a couple of nights, do some things, make like a trip of it. And so to lose that accommodation for the tourism industry it's going to be a huge blow to them to have that potentially that many fewer visitors here on the island. For the community itself, the other part of the provincial park is extremely well used by the community as a whole. There is a beautiful beach around Long Pond, like down around that cove, that islanders go to through the winter. People use it for walking their dogs, that sort of thing, because it's not busy, but it's a beautiful stretch to get out and walk their dogs along the beach. The other part of it is there is a trail that goes from Long Pond down to Red Point. The community over the last 3 years has raised funds to improve that trail, and now it's our only accessible trail on the island. And so, as we were watching pieces of it open, you would see like families with people in wheelchairs who maybe didn't have that opportunity to access nature or to go on a trail. Now they can. And so to have the community invest that much money in part of the provincial park, and then just, to not know, like, are we going to be able to continue to access it long term? What is this going to mean for the community? Those are a lot of the questions that are happening right now. So we're talking to the Boys and Girls Club to see, where they are, what we can do as a village to support them. We've reached out to the Minister of Tourism because we would like to have a conversation about, what this does mean for the island and what opportunities there are, what we can do to make sure that, the provincial park stays open and accessible, not only for visitors, but for islanders as a whole. I mean, it's really early in the conversation. We've not even really had a chance to talk as a council about this. So, I'm not ruling anything out or anything in at this point. I think at this point, we're really in like an information gathering stage, see where we are, and then let's see what the next best steps are for everybody.
That was Mayor of Grand Manan, Bonnie Morse, discussing the potential transfer of Anchorage Provincial Park. Now, we've talked about those hard decisions, some of those cuts, but tell us a little bit about where we're going to see this spending come into play.
Sure. So there's a few things that we're going to discuss in the next little bit, but the biggest priorities happen to be healthcare and education, which I don't think is going to surprise a lot of New Brunswickers. They're spending an additional $700 million in healthcare this year, which includes that $170 to $176 million for the new physician services agreement, which is a big part of their strategic plan to improve healthcare, right? If you pay doctors, they will come. If you pay them properly, they will stay. So that's sort of the philosophy of the government at the moment.
Okay, and I'm sure the collaborative health clinics that we've followed, especially here in the Southwest, we've seen the rollout start already, factor into that too. When we're looking at the spending, and I know that is the fear that a lot of New Brunswickers have that are worried about overspending and deficit, what's your general take from looking at how much they're spending and where it's going?
So there is an additional $30 million, as you said, for 12 more collaborative care clinics this year. We've already had the first one, Blacks Harbour. We believe, although we're not sure, but the Premier is coming on Monday to make an announcement at the Wellness Centre downstairs, and then she's going to a meet and greet at Honeybean. So if you have questions for her, please go.
If you're watching this after the fact, we are sorry you missed it. You could be watching this after Monday too, but you will obviously be hearing about it from the folks at Honeybeans.
Absolutely. But this has always been their priority, and they've been very clear about that. And both Legacy and Holt have come and said, this is where a generational investor, we're making transformative change to how New Brunswickers receive primary care. Now, the question is whether or not New Brunswickers are seeing that change and seeing it in a meaningful way, and that the only time we'll ever get that answer is at the ballot box. So it's a question that sort of is hanging in the air. The spending is going to continue because they want it to continue and they need it to continue because they've got 30 to finish by the end of their mandate.
And I think, it's an ambitious goal. It's also an expensive goal, and you could see that payoff down the road. It's not clear if you'll see that payoff in that short amount of time before the next election, but it's something 10 years down the road. If you're able to reduce the number of people going to an ER for something they could see a nurse practitioner or a physician for, that's their physician, great. If you're able to prevent people who don't have a family doctor from going to the ER because they don't have a family doctor, that's great too. Or catch an illness early because someone was able to get an early appointment and isn't going to require that more expensive care that you would have to get down the road if that illness progresses and becomes more serious. So there's a lot of ways this could financially pay off down the road, and a lot of ways we'll be able to measure it. For me, the question is going to be, when is that payoff beginning? How soon will you see those financial benefits from investing in something this massive and doing this change, which I think a lot of people are excited just to have a family doctor. But down the road, there is that hope that this will also have very positive financial implications for the province as well. I just don't know when we'll see that difference come into play.
Sure. And the 12 this year will bring the total to 23. So that means there's 7 that they'll have to sort of figure out in the remaining time of their mandate, which is less surmountable than maybe 10 or 11 at a time. So this sort of brings them, in the realm of possibility of completing that accomplishment. The other priority that the government has sort of identified is education, right? We hear a lot about education. We hear about oversized classrooms. We hear about under-resourced teachers. We hear about unqualified teachers who are teachers that have stepped up to fill the gaps for a lack of qualified teachers. They're going to invest $19.8 million in educational assistance for both the Anglophone and Francophone sector. Of that money, $1.4 million is to support recruitment and retention through onboarding, mentorship, and workplace improvement. A lot of buzzwords there. Okay.
We've heard about cuts too, though, on the education side that I think is great to hear about investment, but there is a lot of concern that there could be major cuts too.
Well, certainly. So part of the difficult decision section of the budget was that they will be looking at schools that have fewer than 100 students and reviewing those schools for potential closures. 5 of them are in Charlotte County: Fundy Shores, Back Bay, Deer Island, Lawrence Station, and Whitehead. So I think that's 5. And it's sort of, people are sort of like, okay, what does that mean? So I spoke to the minister about that, and this was first reported by CBC New Brunswick. So we got that information from them, and I asked the minister about that, and he said, they've been communicating with the district education councils who are responsible for deciding how schools are closed and when they close. And they have a policy 409, that tells the DECs when a sustainability study should be commissioned on a specific school.
Deer Island high school students tend to take the ferry from the island and go to Fundy High School in St. George. But when they're elementary students, they're able to go to school on the island. I think it's a lot to think about the idea of being a 6-year-old kid on a ferry to a bus to go to elementary school as well. It's nice to be able to start those early years off a little closer to home. So I wonder if those factors will also be taken into consideration.
I'm sure it'll be part of the sustainability study. They have to look at all the possibilities of the different outcomes that could result from a school closure, especially on a place like Deer Island where you can't get off without getting on a boat. But the minister said something to me, it doesn't automatically mean because there's fewer than 100 students, we're going to close the school, right? There's a process to be followed, and they're going to do that. And he said the other thing about this is that every school has a story to tell, right? And so it's very important, and he understands the connection that communities have to their schools, especially for younger children. And I did speak about that with Heidi Ryder, who is the president of the New Brunswick Teachers Association.
So I actually live in a rural community that's gone through the process twice, so I am familiar with it. It really is a process that belongs to the DEC, so the District Education Council, because it's really a decision that needs to be made at a local level and in a local context. So there's so many things that, looking from the outside, we don't know about a rural school or a rural community. So it really is a process that the community needs to have a lot of voice in, that there has to be a lot of conversation, and all those local factors have to be taken into consideration. So the process really already exists. It's a district education council process. And so I think that that's where it belongs, is with those local communities and local people.
I guess in terms of jobs, I guess, what do you think this means for rural teachers? People who live on Deer Island, for example, which is one of the schools that, has less than 100 students who live on the island and work on the island, I guess, so to speak.
Right. So it's hard to speculate what it would mean because we don't know what the outcome will be. But certainly, we know that small class sizes are important, that, when we have small class sizes, we see great success, and it's good for students and for teachers. We know that we want teachers to have all the resources that they need in order for their classes and their students to be successful. So I think it's more that conversation as opposed to, what exactly it's going to mean when we can't speculate as to how things will go. So.
The minister said something interesting to me yesterday that struck me, and he said every school has a story. And oftentimes when we're talking about cutting things like local schools or community centers or heritage sites, we learn about those stories. I guess how important will it be, eventually when decisions start getting made, to remember the stories of schools that, may not end up staying schools, or students may end up getting moved somewhere else. How important are those stories, and how do we make sure that they sort of live on even if they don't exist?
Yeah. So I think that's true, and I really love that. I think our stories as New Brunswickers are so important. I have the scrapbook from when my parents went through a school closure process in the 1970s, and we were lucky our school didn't close at that point. But my parents kept that scrapbook, and I have it now, even though they both passed on. So I think we do have that natural tendency here to keep our stories and keep them close and tell them. And, there's so many great stories about, teachers in this province and students in this province. And so to celebrate those stories is really important.
The full details of the budget are available online. We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to talk about more cuts to provincial services in the province.
We've identified through a data-driven report exactly what municipalities need, and that's approximately $200 million per year over 15 to 20 years.
Welcome back to This Week Uncut. I'm Nathalie Sturgeon.
And I'm Vicki Hogarth. We are sticking with the budget as well as sticking with some cuts. And now we're talking about something that I know online, at least for Southwest New Brunswick, was very much a big deal when it came to the cuts. And I'm talking about provincial veterinary services. This was not something I was overly aware of prior to a lot of the response that we saw from our community.
Right, and you wouldn't necessarily be aware of it if you aren't a horse owner or a hobby farm owner or a livestock owner or a farmer. The Provincial Veterinary Service works with large animals. That's typically their work. They deal with birds and disease and farming animals and all of that other stuff. And they're a very important part of the food supply ecosystem, but also to large animal owners. And in the difficult decisions section, I'm going to say that word so many times, they talked about, transitioning the provincial veterinary service to the private sector.
Okay, so I'm going to just ask what I hope is the obvious question. What does that mean?
So when you take your pet, say you take Maud to the vet, that's a private vet who offers you a service and you pay for it.
And I pay for it. There's
Correct.
No provincial element. What would it mean to have speaking of, I think she knew, there's my dog right there.
So what it means is that there is some sort of provincial support, provincial funding for that provincial veterinary service. I'm not clear on what that cost is. And it wasn't included in the statement that they released later on yesterday. And I did reach back out to the Department of Agriculture, Aquaculture, and Fisheries. And as of the time of this filming, we don't have an answer on the annual cost. But essentially, this is going to be what veterinarians are saying is going to be quite devastating. I talked to Dr. Melanie Egan, who is the doctor at the St. George Veterinary Hospital in St. George.
Well known across Charlotte County, Dr. Egan building that incredible shelter too.
Yes, she donated the land for that, and they're well underway. They're doing great over there. And she said, this means there's just going to be no veterinary service for rural livestock or large animal owners unless they have a relationship with someone in the private sector, which she said is few and far between. So the gap is building. She said, and most, if not all, large animal vets that are in private practice are not taking new clients. So if you have large animals and there's an emergency, there's no one to help.
Wow. Okay. So I guess this is one of those things too at home. If you're watching, you have large animals and you want to reach out for ways we can cover it. If we can come visit you and your farm and take a look at what it means, hear from you directly, I think it would make for more news stories that could really help explain this a little better to us as well, so that we can understand why in our region this is really one of the things that stood out to Charlotte County residents, and we got the most response from immediately when the budget was released, before I had even looked at it actually.
Well, and you and I think alike, I think, on that, because I reached out to our friend Sean Richard, the proprietor of Drew Haven, who owns a large horse, and I said, can I come by? Can we talk about this? But he's just getting, started as a horse owner. So he said he suggested some people that we could speak with. But, really the provincial veterinary service is sort of a critical piece of the infrastructure. Egan said difficult births, broken legs, horses with colic, bad infections, bad lacerations, infected, broken teeth, diseases. No veterinary care for any of these things will lead to suffering and the death of animals.
So a lot to look into, a lot of angles to look at when dealing with this issue. But I know you also spoke with the Union of the Municipalities. So what was it that they had to say about this very topic?
Good old Nathalie and municipal government. Of course, I went to the Union of Municipalities because this is the organization that represents a large portion of New Brunswick's population. A lot of people live in the collective 77 municipalities. And so they had, some positive feelings about the budget, and they had some concerns about the budget. The positive was in the fact that there's a continued commitment on fiscal reform, which we know is not complete. And there is an additional $47.5 million that is going to be put back into this fund for infrastructure renewal, which we know is an issue. However, that falls very short of the $200 million per year that they need to catch up over the next 10 to 15 years. So a bit of both worlds there, if you're paying attention to the numbers.
Okay, well, I have to ask, because you are our in-depth Nathalie Sturgeon, where will you be going next with your reporting when it comes to taking a deep dive on the budget?
So I haven't done a story yet on the Union of Municipalities response, and so we're going to take a look at that. They raised concerns about the provincial veterinary service, the cuts to the civil service, which will be cuts to Part 1, so about 12% over the next several years. And they want doubling for funding for housing and infrastructure, updating, operationalizing a provincial public transportation strategy, committing to a digital shared service for local governments, and developing a municipal climate adaptation and mitigation fund. So I will be going to as many local municipalities in Charlotte County as I can to sort of get a feel for how they're responding to this budget. Some of them have already been impacted by cuts. Some of them are going to want some of this $47.5 million. Some of them are going to be very keen to learn about the Municipal Climate and Adaptation Mitigation Fund, because as you're about to hear from the president of the Union of Municipalities, there has been a reduction in the overall budget for that. And you'll all be acutely aware of the Market Wharf Market Square project that needs a little more than $2 million, depending on what option they choose, right? Fundy Engineering has come back with a bit more of a curbed financial program for them to choose from, but certainly there's going to be costs there. So all of these things I'm gonna continue to look at, and I'm gonna go to as many municipalities as I can to sort of get put my thumb on the pulse of how they're feeling and how they're responding. Take a listen to Union of Municipalities of New Brunswick President Brittany Merrifield.
Well, first of all, we were concerned with the talk of difficult decisions that the fiscal reform piece might not be moving forward in terms of the top up to the capital renewal fund for the upcoming year. The government stayed good on that promise, so we're very, very pleased with that is moving forward. There was a modest increase to the provincial municipal highway program bucket. And that's great, but it really just brings us back to 2018 levels, not really even including inflation. And inflation for things like asphalt, et cetera, is much higher than, say, the inflation that you would expect to see on a liter of milk. So that bucket does need to be a lot bigger in a lot of municipalities across the province. They're struggling with their municipally designated highways not receiving the asset management and the renewal that they need to. So that while it's going in the right direction, it's not it didn't go far enough in our opinion. A little concerned about things related to the climate change piece. There was a reduction there. We don't at this point know exactly what that signifies, but we certainly have our eye on that.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of sitting front row to a lot of the infrastructure issues. In particular, here in Charlotte County, we're talking about, water and sewer infrastructure, boil water orders, deciding, do we pave that street or do we pave this street? Who's worse? That sort of thing. And so I guess, 47.5 million is quite short of the 200 million that is what is, I guess, data is what is supported by the data that you need, I guess, is what I'm trying to get at there. So it does fall short of what you need.
Yeah, it does. And, we're continuing to push on that, Nathalie, that, we've identified through a data-driven report exactly what municipalities need. And that's approximately 200 million per year over, 15 to 20 years. That will really move the needle in terms of addressing the infrastructure deficit across the province. So we are moving in the right direction with fiscal reform. The work is not done. The other thing that we have been advocating for consistently over the last couple of years is the diversification of municipal revenue. And I know you've heard me say this before, but 85% of municipal revenues come from property tax. So that doesn't give us a lot of room to move. It doesn't give us a lot of flexibility. So the diversification of those revenues is really one of the things that we've been after. We've been other provinces do it in the way that we're advocating for, and that is for a point of the HST that allows us to participate in any economic growth in the in the province, and also share in any downturns, etc. So it's one of those measures that move up and down depending on the economy. And the reason that's important is because property taxpayers, particularly residential property taxpayers, are the ones that are bearing the burden of the revenues required to run their municipality. So that is something that we have advocated for. We continue to advocate for, and it's considered a main priority of the association.
Have they given you sort of a timeline for that diversification? I know they've committed to it, but they've committed to it many times and haven't come through with it.
Well, fiscal reform, I said that's a good first step, but there's obviously still work that needs to be done. The government has been a good partner in that so far, but we need to continue to make the noise and make the case. And the case isn't just for the municipality; it's actually for the New Brunswicker that's paying that property tax bill at the end of the day.
That was Union of Municipalities of New Brunswick President Brittany Merrifield, who is also the mayor of Grand Bay Westfield.
We are going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be heading to Eastern Charlotte for the results of a code of conduct complaint.
I move that council determine that Mayor Craig has breached the code of conduct as outlined in the report, and that council impose the following corrective actions in accordance with the code of conduct regulation.
Welcome back to This Week Uncut. I'm Vicki Hogarth.
And I'm Nathalie Sturgeon. We go now to Eastern Charlotte for the results of an investigation or a legal review into the Code of Conduct complaint against Mayor John Craig. You were at that meeting, so you kind of got to see the process a little bit firsthand.
Wow, I know. I mean, from the last meeting in February where we saw Councillor McKay read her complaint, her formal complaint against the mayor, and we had the opportunity to watch Mayor Craig defend himself before he left the room. Then council decided, led by Deputy Mayor Hatt, that they would go to legal, send it to a lawyer to review the situation. Now, what the complaint that Lisa McKay made about John Craig was that there were a number of things. One, he signed a letter in support of Irving. We'll get to the details of that.
JD Irving Limited, the timber company, specifically that they were requesting to log conservation land in exchange for preserving land in Charlotte County.
So John Craig signed a mayor in support of that without bringing it to councillor first. Then he also went on a trip to Ottawa that was paid for by the city of Campbell River in British Columbia, and it was about being an East Coast representative for fish farming that they were worried about in BC, legislation changing what they were able to do. Campbell River Mayor asked John Craig to come along on their dime. He said he didn't spend any of Eastern Charlotte's money when he was there. He spent out of pocket even for his rides to the airport. Nevertheless, council, I believe, felt they should have been informed before his trip, though I think they were relieved that no money was spent from the municipality on his trip. And on top of that, Councillor McKay said there were some comments made in a committee of the whole meeting from Mayor Craig, which he defended, saying he was simply responding to being asked to step down in that meeting. So complicated, definitely a very intense meeting. We watched the whole conversation between the councillors play out. You can watch the February meeting if you want to see that in whole. It was the first time seeing it in public like that, thanks to your work that had the Local Governments Commission really put that in the public, that these things are meant to happen in public. It had been misinterpreted across the province for a long time to see councillors and mayors as staff, and therefore to handle that enclosed. Not the case, as it turns out, thanks to your reporting. You changed the way things go across the province, no big deal. So we watched the first one happen openly in Eastern Charlotte. So now March's meeting that I was just at, we all had to leave the room for a closed session, actually, including the mayor went off into a room by himself. Everyone from the people filming, myself and Patrick this time, and the audience had to leave, go into the hallway as we watched council. Just I could see them through a glass window, debating what the reprimand would be.
Yeah, I mean, it's also credit to the Local Governance Commission. I would have known nothing if it had not been for the Local Governance Commission and its chair, Giselle Gauguin, releasing that advisory to the public, which had been given to councils in June. And it wasn't released to us until December. So there was, I have questions about why it was done in June, but not people weren't implementing it until after the reporting sort of surfaced. CBC sort of got at this as well when it talked about straight shores, which I think is what brought the Code of Conduct issue to light to the commission, right? The commission is new. Its oversight is about the local governance and sort of their operation, and they're still in their infancy. They've gotten that one annual report out which recommended mandatory training, which I also wrote about, which the government is not going to move forward on. They're going to offer voluntary option, and the voluntary option will become part of the public record, and so people can go look if their councillor has decided to do that. So I just want to be clear that the part that the Local Governance Commission wanted to clarify to councils is that councillors and mayors cannot be considered employees when it comes to the exemptions, plural, outlined in Section 68(1) of the Local Governance Act. There are, I think, 10, and they range, legal advice, financial loss or gain to a municipality, right to information protection of Privacy Act rules. So there's a varying degree of exemptions to an open meeting that can go into a closed meeting. Because councillors and mayors are not employees, they cannot have those discussions in closed.
They are elected officials.
That's right. And so that's why you saw that play out in the public space. Now, this time around, they did have legal advice. Now, I want to be really clear. with the legislation. The legislation says you may go into closed session. So may implies you have a choice. Shall is no choice. So the legislation says may. I just want to make that clear because there was some language that was used during the meeting. And so I just want to make that clear. They have a choice there. Some of them are less of a choice, right? You can't, the Right to Information Protection and Privacy Act is very clear, right? But they did come out of that closed session. I can't remember how long it was, but it felt like forever. I was sitting there, tapping my fingers. I was watching at home, tapping my fingers.
And by watching it
texting Vicki, going, "Is this still going? Is the stream broken?" Because Patrick was there.
This is new for us too. So what we decided to do was, yes, it took a minute. I was behind the camera. I've got it, earpiece in here, listening to the other room. So I'm sort of half hearing what's going on in council. But we all had to get up and we had to decide in that moment, okay, shut the mics down, put a screen up, but there's people watching live at home. How long will this just blank screen be on there? And I think it was, it always feels longer when you're watching, but I would say it was about, I can find out for sure, but I think it was around 20 minutes.
Well, and I got really nervous because Flo wasn't there and I was seeing things on the meeting I'm not used to seeing. And so I was like, has something happened?
Flo never takes a vacation is the thing.
So we were in uncharted waters last night in more ways than one. But what we did find out is that he breached the code of conduct. There were 2 breaches of the code of conduct. It is unclear what those breaches were. So there were 3 kind of things that were identified in that code of conduct complaint, but we know there were 2 breaches. And the council decided that as a result, they would sanction him with a letter of reprimand. So it's a letter from the town, indicating to Mayor Craig that reprimand and sort of an indication that, you did violate the code of conduct bylaw. Be mindful next time of the actions that you've taken that have been incorrect. So we did reach out to Councillor McKay as well.
Okay, she was not at the meeting last night. She had something else on the go, I heard from council, so she wasn't in attendance.
And I did go back to Mayor Craig because this is about him. I wanted a response from him, and he said, in my zest for supporting local jobs and local industry, I may have gotten ahead of myself. I apologize to council. And in true John fashion, he gave me one of the best quotes I've heard in a long time. If I make a mistake, I own it and move on from it. That's what real leaders do. So it's, this is a moment. He said, we're going to learn from this and we're going to move forward with it, right? He has always told me that if you are in a position where you think you know everything in this job, it's time to step away from that job. And I was encouraged because he said, I'm still learning. I learned from this situation. So this is a process that we know now has played out. We're sort of, waiting to see whether or not that was the correct process, because councils have sort of been, allowed to just decide how they want to do this, right? And even Councillor, I think Adam Hatt was asking, we need a clearer policy. We need a, clearer, stronger processes here, because this is not adequate, right? So we're sort of seeing, it's kind of like growing pains, I guess, from a decision that's been made at the provincial level, which is now being, sort of handed down without any guidance to local governments.
And I think that's a really admirable thing, though, of the mayor to say that, look, to own your mistake. I think that's very refreshing sometimes in this day and age.
Exactly. We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to take a look at what the team is doing next week. Welcome back to This Week Uncut. I'm Nathalie Sturgeon.
And I'm Vicki Hogarth. We are looking ahead to next week, which truthfully I've already started because I have a lot on the go with municipal elections looming. I want to throw this out there to people at home right now who are on the fence about running, curious about running a municipal election, because we have the event for you. Everyone knows we do amazing candidate nights and mayor debates leading up to the elections, which are May 11th, with the different communities across Charlotte County. But we've never done something in the beginning, before the papers are even the deadline for submission has happened. So what we're doing this time is teaming up with the Southwest New Brunswick Service Commission to bring you a webinar. Really, it's Municipal Government, Local Government 101. It'll be about an hour and a half panel of former mayors and councillors. Everyone who wants to participate can register. It will be live streamed too, but if you want to ask your own questions, please register. That information will be provided early next week once we have the exact time set. But we're going to have people from across Charlotte County who have served their communities here to answer your questions and also to give you a reality check of what it is and what it isn't. So you want to go into these positions really having, as we've seen in today's show, we learn along the way, all of us, even as journalists sometimes, even the province as a whole, like code of conduct, as we saw this past year. But what we want to do with this webinar is give people all the information they need that might inspire them to take the leap, or for some people might say, hey, I don't have that type of time commitment available to me right now. So it's better to know these things beforehand, and I think this is our way and the Service Commission's way of giving back a little more to Charlotte County and being a place where people can get all the information they need even before those nomination papers are due.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I've been asked to participate in this. And so some of you are going to hear from me whether you like it or not. But I've prepared a presentation. I hope you enjoy it. It's full of color and words. And
I have, of course, yes, asked Nathalie to speak to the role of municipal government when it comes to the media. So we'll have someone from the province as well, Andrea Anderson-Mason, who is the MLA for Fundy the Isles Lorneville, when it was Fundy the Isles St. John West. She was also the Minister of Justice at one point too. So she is coming down to be a part of this. She said she feels this event is so important that it happens to be her husband's birthday. So thank you for letting her come. And she's going to be here as well. And I will release the whole roster of candidates next week. We are always excited for all the amount of people that come out every week to spend an hour with us on this show. It's been a really special experience and continues to be. And thank you for sitting down with me. And thank all of you at home for joining us once again on This Week Uncut. I'm Vicki Hogarth.
And I'm Nathalie Sturgeon. We'll see you next week.